reference for the investigations that are underway have already been published.
Order. I can't hear what's being said. It's quite obvious it is not the Prime Minister, so we don't need to keep asking that question. So please, can I hear what the Minister's got to say? He's got the tough job as it is. Don't make it harder for him. Come on, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has asked for an investigation to take place, and the terms of reference for the investigations that are underway have already been published and deposited in the libraries of this House, and in fact of both Houses. The investigations are now being led by Sue Gray. She is the second Permanent Secretary at the Cabinet Office and the Department for Levelling Up, and of course she is a former Director General of Propriety and Ethics. The Government has committed to publishing the findings of the investigation and providing these to Parliament in the normal way. The terms of reference set out that where there are credible allegations relating to other gatherings, it is open for those to be investigated. And I can confirm to the House, Mr. Speaker, that this includes the allegations relating to the 15th and 20th of May 2020. It will establish the facts, and if wrongdoing is established, there will be requisite disciplinary action taken. As with all internal investigations, if evidence emerges of what was potentially a criminal offence, the matter would be referred to the Metropolitan Police, and the Cabinet Office's work may be paused. Matters relating to the adherence of the law are, as ever, matters for the Metropolitan Police to investigate, and the Cabinet Office will liaise with them as appropriate. As I am sure members of this House will appreciate, it would not be appropriate for me to comment on an ongoing investigation, and the Government has committed to updating the House in due course. Mr. Speaker, I must again point out, as I did in December, and I know the House will also understand, that there is a long-standing practice of successive administrations that any human resources matters concerning personnel relating to individuals does need to remain confidential. But, Mr. Speaker, both the Prime Minister and I came before this House in December. We set out the details of the investigation being led by the Cabinet Office into these allegations of gatherings, and those investigations are continuing.
Let's come to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Angela Rayner. We don't need clapping.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. And it is incredibly disappointing, but not unsurprising, that the Prime Minister, of whom I asked this question, is not here today, despite not having any official engagements. And I think, Mr. Speaker, his absence speaks volumes, as does his smirks on the media. The public have already drawn their own conclusions. He can run, but he can't hide. Mr. Speaker, I received an email this morning from a man called John, who told me on the 20th of May 2020, I found my long-time partner dead on the bathroom floor. I'd been unable to get a GP visit for her, and she had suffered terribly for some time before the blood clot stopped her heart. That day, the House heard from the Prime Minister himself that 181 NHS workers and 131 social care staff had died. Many people made huge personal sacrifices. And the Minister, quite frankly, hides behind the Gray investigation. There's no need for an investigation into the simple, central question today. Did the Prime Minister attend the event in the Downing Street Garden on the 20th of May 2020? It won't wash, Mr. Speaker, to blame this on a few junior civil servants. The Prime Minister sets the tone.
Yeah, exactly.
If the Prime Minister was there, surely he knew.
Exactly.
The investigation was sent, the invitation was sent to 100 staff. Many of them his own most personal senior appointees. This was organised in advance, Mr Speaker. So did the Prime Minister know about the event beforehand? And did he give its permission for it to go ahead? And if so, did he believe this event was keeping with the restrictions at the time and the guidelines? And was the Chief Medical Officer consulted before it went ahead? And what did the Chancellor know about the party, given that he lives and works next door? And can the Minister confirm that no other ministers were present? And finally, Mr Speaker, can I ask the Minister here today, does he still believe the Prime Minister to be a man of honour and integrity?
Mr Speaker, her first point was that the Prime Minister was not here in person. She knows, as well as everyone else in this House, that it is not routine for the Prime Minister to answer urgent questions before this House, but his ministers are appointed to do so. But he also attends this House more often than anyone else to answer questions, and will be doing so tomorrow in the normal way at Prime Minister's question time. She mentioned the loss of the appalling loss suffered by one of her constituents, and my heart goes out to that constituent and indeed to all of the others from whom we have heard in this House, on all sides of this House, who have suffered tragic loss as a consequence of this appalling pandemic. There is a need for an investigation. She said there wasn't. There is a need, and that need is clear. The investigation is in progress. It's being conducted by someone with whom we have great confidence, and if I can put it this way, a paragon of independence and integrity, and in the civil service, of long standing. She is conducting that investigation, and the Prime Minister was, of course, himself affected by the consequence of a COVID-19 infection. He takes this matter very seriously, as does everyone in government. But I will say this. She asks if I have confidence in the Prime Minister's integrity and honour, and I do.
Sir Desmond Swayne.
All this should be a powerful corrective to the urge to order the rest of our lives, shouldn't it?
Well, we each of us in this House, and no doubt everywhere else, live our lives in the best way that we can. And those of us in positions of responsibility acknowledge that responsibility. That is why there is an investigation in progress which will get to the bottom of all of these matters, and that is in progress.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I congratulate my right honourable friend for obtaining this question. But, Mr Speaker, let's look around. Where is the Prime Minister? The Prime Minister should be here to answer these serious questions. Where is the government front bench? And indeed, where is the government back benches? Mr Speaker, this is the most serious of matters, because this is the Prime Minister who has been accused of breaking a law that he himself set. It could not be more serious, and I have sympathy with the Minister, who is the fall guy to have to answer this today. The harsh reality, Mr Speaker, is that people round these islands watch loved ones dying and missing funerals, and the PM and his staff partied behind the walls of his private garden. Mr Speaker, on that very day, on the 20th of May, there was a tweet from the Metropolitan Police reminding people of their responsibilities. You could only meet with one person outside. The Cabinet Secretary for Culture gave a press conference at Number 10 at 5 p.m, reiterating that message. There was one rule for the rest of us and another rule for those in Number 10. Now, the Minister is seeking to hide behind the investigation, but let me ask the Minister, was Sue Gray one of those invited to that party on the 20th of May, and did indeed she attend? Mr Speaker, this is a Prime Minister that has lost his moral authority. He doesn't deserve the respect and the trust of the people of these islands. And if he won't do the decent thing and recognise that he ought to resign, I say to the Minister, and I say to the Conservative backbenchers, that they are going to have to do what the Prime Minister has failed to do and force him from office, and do it now.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I don't accept the characterisation that the right honourable gentleman puts. It's clear that in this country the same rules apply to everyone, and that is why there is an investigation in progress. I hope he will not adopt the approach of questioning the integrity of any civil servant who is investigating this matter. We know that Sue Gray is someone who has conducted previous investigations with thoroughness and vigour. And I think we can rest assured that the result of her inquiry will be in the public domain in due course. But she is a person of integrity and upstanding, so I hope he will not adopt that approach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's important that this place does debate such serious allegations, but that we debate them once the evidence has been collected? So that
I hope that's not a question on me granting this UQ, because that looks like it's going. I wouldn't go down that road if we were both.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that it's important that we have a debate in this place about these issues once the final recommendations are being put forward by Sue Gray? Because it's important that we look at the evidence.
Well, I thank the right honourable lady for her question, and in fact, she is agreeing, I think, with the Leader of the Opposition, because he is the one who said, let's let the inquiry play out. Let's see what the findings are. So I think her point is a good one, that we should wait to see what the result of this investigation is, rather than prejudge it.
Ed David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister set out what he thinks should happen if a Conservative MP is found to have flouted and broken a COVID law?
It's not for me, Mr. Speaker, to pass judgment or to pass sentence. First of all, the natural order of justice, as I'm sure he knows, is that an investigation, a fair and impartial investigation, takes place before there is a judge, jury and executioner. What needs to happen is that investigation needs to take its natural course in an orderly way, rather than judge guilt or innocence beforehand.
Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, of course, have great confidence in the Prime Minister and the way he's been governing the country. But would the Minister agree with me that we need the report urgently in the House so that we can debate it and reach conclusion? I'm slightly worried, Mr. Speaker, by the Minister saying that this would have to be paused if there was a Metropolitan Police investigation. Is he confident that we will get the report to this House quickly? And if he could give us an indication of when.
I thank my honourable friend from Wellingborough. The Prime Minister did ask for the investigation to be conducted swiftly, and I think that is on the record. As to how long it lasts, I don't know, because we have not stipulated a time. Sue Gray is conducting this investigation independently of the Executive's directions, as he would expect and as the House would expect. We hope for a result swiftly, but that will be a matter for her.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps it would be faster if Sue Gray were to investigate the days that there weren't parties on. Now, the Minister, I have sympathy for the Minister because he's been sent with his gatherings excuse to defend the utterly indefensible. We know, do we not, Mr. Speaker, that an invite to a Bring Your Own Booze party was sent out for the 20th of May when 268 people died in hospital on that day. We know that it was illegal to meet anyone outside of your own household except one person overnight. So what is there to wait for. The Prime Minister should come here now, fess up and tell us what happened.
I know, if I may say so, the Honourable Lady has an excellent reputation in this House, amongst other things, for fairness. And I know that she would want a fair investigation to take place before any comment was made. So all we are asking to do is to wait a swift period of time for the investigation to conclude. That is in the order of justice, natural order of fair play.
Suzanne Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, this is an important matter. There is absolutely no doubt about that. But there will be a full investigation, actually, into this matter, and that is the most important thing to remember at this time. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the time of this House is better spent at this moment in time as we recover from the pandemic? The time of this House is better spent debating how we will build back better and level up. That is what my constituents are looking for.
Minister.
Well, she's absolutely right to mention that it's in the governance of this country and in the performance of the executive in delivering for the people of this country, both in dealing with the exigencies of this pandemic, but also in matters such as levelling up. It is this government which is performing and which it is prioritising. So she's right to focus on that. This is, of course, a matter of concern to the House, and that's accepted, and that is why we're before the House today. But this matter will be investigated and will take place in the proper order of events.
Al Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that the Prime Minister is socially distanced from accountability, responsibility and integrity. But can we be absolutely sure that he will be here tomorrow to face the music instead of hiding behind Sue Gray?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, no one is hiding. The fact of the matter is that the Prime Minister will be before the House for Prime Minister's questions in the normal course of events. And so tomorrow, at this time, he will be in this chamber. The reality of the matter is that at the moment the position is that we are awaiting the outcome of an investigation that is in progress. So I know that he will want to approach this matter reasonably, and that is to wait for the result of an investigation.
Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, why can't all the dirty linen be washed at once? Why are we getting this drip feed of parties? Surely the civil service must have known that there was a party on the 20th of May, and they should have referred that already to the inquiry.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes a good point. The reality is, of course, that we have a number of dates that have come out at different times, and that will presumably have an effect of delaying matters. But we have commissioned the terms of reference of the investigation that I think I came before this House on the 9th of December to tell the House about, and that is laid in the libraries of both Houses, is that any dates that the Second Permanent Secretary feels are appropriate to investigate, she will. And I have confirmed to this House that the 15th and 20th of May of 2020 are now amongst those dates.
Catherine McKinnon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Paymaster General agree with me that it would be utterly obscene if at the same time...
Oh, there's some phones going off, I think. Oh, it stopped. Carry on, sorry.
That it would be utterly obscene, thank you, Mr. Speaker, that if at the same time that a support group was contacting me, a support group for recovering alcoholics, desperate to meet, because they needed the mutual support to manage their addiction during the crushing isolation of lockdown, that staff at Number 10 were not only being encouraged to gather, but were being told to bring their own booze while doing so. I appreciate the Prime Minister is not here to answer for his actions, but does the Paymaster General agree that that would be obscene?
I'm not going to presuppose any conclusions of the inquiry. The inquiry is taking place. Even the Leader of the Opposition has said that we should let the inquiry play out, we should see what the findings are, and conclusions can be drawn then.
Andrew Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the work of the Second Permanent Secretary of the Cabinet Office is both important and urgent. Can my right honourable friend give any indication as to when it might be completed?
I can only say that the Prime Minister has asked that the inquiry be swift, and I have no other indications other than that.
Pete Wishart.
Mr. Speaker, this isn't the straw that broke the camel's back. This is a 10-ton weight being placed directly on the poor, dilapidated beast posterior. Surely, if the Prime Minister had a smidgen of self-respect, any sense of integrity, he will be listening to this and he will decide himself. It is time to go. For goodness sake, man, go.
Minister.
Prime Minister, the Prime Minister focuses on the primary purpose of running this country, which is to deliver on the manifesto promises of this government. The primary purpose of this investigation will be to establish swiftly a general understanding of the nature of the gatherings that we've been hearing about, which will include attendance, which will include the setting and the purpose. I know that the honourable gentleman is inclined to presuppose what the result of the investigation will be, but the fair approach would be to wait until the results of an investigation that has been commissioned several weeks now.
Ben Bradshaw.
If the Prime Minister broke the law, he will resign, won't he?
Minister.
It's an entirely hypothetical position. There is... He seeks to draw me... The Prime Minister's going nowhere. He seeks to draw me into making a supposition about the result of any inquiry. But the Prime Minister retains the confidence of the people of this country, and he did so 2 years ago with the biggest majority in decades.
Paul Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A survey by the Alzheimer's Society showed that the health of 82% of people affected by dementia deteriorated during the first lockdown. Reduced social contact was a significant contributory factor. Given that, does the Minister agree that it would be unforgivable for the Prime Minister to prevaricate, to obfuscate, to seek to evade, to seek to distract from, to joke about, or even take refuge in an industrial refrigerator, or perhaps just lie about parties at number 10?
Minister.
We'll await the result of the investigation.
Zara Sultan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than 150,000 COVID deaths, the highest toll in Europe, a cost of living crisis with universal credit slashed and bills rocketing, a second job scandal, an attempt to let his corrupt mate off the hook, a dodgy flat donation and accusations of cash for access, and now this, a Downing Street party that was against the law, which the Prime Minister claimed didn't happen, but reportedly attended. After all of this, does the Minister not feel embarrassed that the Prime Minister hasn't got the decency to resign?
Minister.
I would say to the Honourable Lady that she is fond of making unsubstantiated accusations that are devoid of evidence, and she should wait in the due course of events before doing so. She has particularised certain items which are part of her allegations, about which she has no evidence, and she should be very cautious about doing that.
Ian Mabley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Paymaster General's been given an unenviable task this morning. He really has, but perhaps he could use his experience as a former Solicitor General and Attorney General to explain to the House what advice he would give to a hypothetical Prime Minister, someone who perhaps has lied to the country, someone who has perhaps lied to this House, someone who has laughed at times when people have died in their communities. What advice would the Paymaster General offer this hypothetical Prime Minister?
Minister.
The advice as a law officer that I would always offer, and as I did as a barrister in practice, is to be fair to all sides. And that includes listening to evidence, collating evidence properly, and acting judiciously at all times. That is what we expect in this country, rather than prejudging matters and jumping to unwarranted and unfair conclusions. That applies to justice to all in this country.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assaults on police officers in 2021 in England and Wales saw a 20% increase to over 25,000. And I personally know of police officers who have been spat at, pushed, shoved and punched while doing their job, which includes enforcing the COVID regulations. So I think police officers up and down this country will be appalled to hear that the Prime Minister and Downing Street staff were allegedly partying while they were doing their job during the worst of the pandemic. So given that all the evidence suggests that this party did take place and that the Prime Minister was present at that party, does the Paymaster General agree that the Prime Minister should write a letter of apology to every one of those police officers assaulted whilst enforcing COVID regulations?
Minister.
Of course, as the Honourable Lady knows, this Prime Minister has always been a very strong supporter of the police. As Mayor of London, unlike the present incumbent of that office, he saw the reduction of crime in London. As Prime Minister, he has increased the number of police officers serving on the streets. This Prime Minister believes in law and order. He supports the police. They know that. In fact, he visited a police station in my constituency in Northampton only last week. The Prime Minister is very supportive of our police service and will continue to be.
Abdul Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My mum, loved mum, died of COVID in March 2020. She died alone in hospital while I sat in the car outside trying to be as close to her as I could. Even burdened with our grief, my family obeyed the rules. Just 3 days after the Downing Street party, we marked a solemn Eid, the first without my lovely mum. Mr. Speaker, when asked by Sky News about the parties, the Prime Minister did little but smirk and laugh.
Shame.
He should be here today. But as he is not, can the Minister confirm whether the Prime Minister will be apologising to bereaved families like mine for the anguish, pain and torment caused not just by hosting these parties, but for continuing to lie about it?
I think the last of that is not the language of Jews, and I'm sure that I think we could let that one go, and I'm sure the member will want that to stand record.
Mr. Speaker, I'm appalled at his tragic loss, and I'm so sorry to hear about his mother, and my heart goes out to him and his family. The Prime Minister knows the seriousness of this disease, COVID-19. He himself, as the Honourable Gentleman knows, was in intensive care as a consequence of it. And he also knows, having spoken to innumerable individuals who have suffered loss themselves, that this has resulted in the deaths of many people in this country and around the world. He knows that, and he will never forget that. I ask him to accept my assurance that the Prime Minister is someone for whom his responsibilities are writ large, for someone who works hard in the interests of this country, and who will be subject to Sue Gray's investigation, together with her inquiry into all of these parties. So I ask him to wait to see what the result, I presume, a relatively short time, until we hear from Sue Gray.
Charlotte Littles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A constituent of mine who I'll call Malcolm got in touch this morning, having been fined £100 of fixed penalty notice for breaching the coronavirus regulations. Now, he accepts wrongdoing on his part. However, it strikes me as incredibly unfair that at the same time as the Downing Street parties were happening and ministers and MPs seem to be flagrantly breaching the rules, that constituents like mine should have to pay. So I asked the Minister, when will Malcolm and everyone else who's been fined for breach of the regulations be getting their money back?
I presume that her constituent, together with others who have been penalised for breach of the regulations, were duly convicted, or either that or they accepted their responsibility in the matter. What she is doing, if I may say so, is prejudging the matter, and she should wait for the result of the investigation, just as presumably as Malcolm did.
Neil Hanby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's an expression, the buck stops at the top, that is usually applied by people in leadership when they take responsibility. In April last year, my friend, Fit Ray, 58 years old, lost his battle with COVID and died. We went to his funeral online via video link. In August that year, my father passed away, and I was fortunate enough to be able to be in the room with him and hold his hand as he passed away. In the intervening months between those two dates, I lost count of the amount of conversations I had with families and council officers trying to negotiate more than 6 or 8 people at a funeral. Can you please explain, or sorry, I apologise, Mr. Speaker, can the Paymaster General please explain why the Downing Street social world is more important than those lives and the law of the land?
Minister.
Can I start by saying that I'm very sorry for his loss of his friend and of his father. I think it would only be fair to challenge him on his point about what Downing Street staff think. Downing Street staff work very hard for the people of this country, and it would not be fair to characterise all of the work that they have done over the course of years in the way that he does. We don't want to prejudge what occurred on that occasion, but the reality is most people, I think we should take the approach, unless proven to the contrary, that most people, no matter what their party political persuasion, who are in public life, work in the public service and do the best that they can.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has come here today pretty lonely on his own to deal for the Prime Minister with these serious questions that have been raised, but no self-respecting minister would come here without knowing the facts about what happened. And the question here is simply, did the Prime Minister attend the gathering on the 20th of May? There's a simple yes or no answer to that. I'm assuming that the Minister, in coming here to answer for him, has put that question to the Prime Minister and knows the answer. He's here to tell this House. Can he give the answer to that question to this House and do so now?
Minister.
That is a matter for Sue Gray and her investigation. It is not a matter for me. And the government, and I am supported by my colleagues throughout government in this matter.
Sir Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In and around May the 20th, my life was saved by doctors, nurses and non-medical staff who came forward, often without personal protective equipment, and were prepared to take that risk because they did their duty. Does the Paymaster General honestly believe that the Prime Minister's behaviour, as it is evidence in our newspapers, would give confidence to those people who saved my life? Didn't they deserve better?
Minister.
Well, Prime Minister, those people who have served the people of this country and the National Health Service deserve everything we can give them. So to answer his question, of course they deserve everything we can do to support them, and they get that. They do get that support from this government. But the reality is we would be wrong to prejudge and to make assumptions about what happened on any given day based on unknown sources. So I think he will wait to find out for sure what occurred.
And then Keza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the holy month of Ramadan, Muslims across all 4 nations gather for iftar events to break their fast, and in May 2020 they didn't. In the evenings during Ramadan, Muslims gather at the mosques to pray Taraweeh. In May 2020 they didn't, and on Eid al-Fitr they pray Eid namaz together and celebrate with family. And on the 24th of May 2020 they didn't. Yet on the 20th of May, just days before Eid, those who were making the rules at number 10 were breaking them. So I ask the Paymaster General, if Muslims and people of different faiths listened to the rules and did not celebrate religious events, then why were the rules different for those in number 10 for social events?
Minister.
I acknowledge that people of the Muslim faith, and indeed, of course, people of the Christian and Hindu and other faiths, Jewish faith, all had suffered considerable interruption to their high holy days. I absolutely accept that, and for many people of strong faith, that is very painful. They do so, and they did so, of course, and they did so around the world, in other countries too, in the wider public interest, to support the public health of all. They were asked to do that, and they did so in order to protect their fellow citizens. We respect that, and we admire that, and we ask people to do that with a heavy heart, that we did so for the best reasons.
Richard Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the unavoidable truth is that the public believe the Prime Minister is a liar who treats them with contempt. There's a crisis of public confidence. Isn't the only way to restore public confidence for the Prime Minister, for once to act in the public interest and resign now?
Minister.
I don't think the public believe what the honourable gentleman believes.
Paul says 2/3 of people do.
Chris Almore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've raised with the Paymaster General when we had this UQ before, and I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, for you granting it. I almost missed the birth of my son in January last year. My wife was 9.5 centimetres dilated before I was allowed in. She was found in a freezing cold bath having uncontrolled contractions. We followed the rules to protect midwifery staff. I have been inundated with emails from my own constituents and constituents across the UK since I raised this in the House before Christmas, Mr. Speaker. I and many parents, fathers, mothers, partners, would like an apology from the Prime Minister. As we followed rules to protect NHS staff, he partied, and the Paymaster General should show some grace and be upfront with this House about what he knows, because the public really have had enough.
Well, I'm very sorry that he nearly missed the birth of his child, and I know that many parents will have actually missed the birth of their children during the course of this appalling pandemic. The whole purpose of the investigation is to establish the facts, and if wrongdoing is established, there will be requisite action.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the Minister for coming to the House today, but the people of Newport West expected to see the Prime Minister. And it's a shame the Paymaster General has to cover for his boss. And I do really feel sorry for him because he has got a rotten job today, Mr. Speaker. But can the Minister tell us why anyone in this House or this country should ever believe a word the Prime Minister says again?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be here tomorrow at Prime Minister's Questions in the normal course of events, and that is more frequent than almost any other minister when they appear before this House on their departmental oral questions. So I think it is only fair to point out that the Prime Minister does answer these questions himself. I have the support of the entire government in this matter, in the answers that I can give. And my answers are predicated on the fact that in the order of natural justice, we wait for the results of the inquiry and investigation that's taking place. That would be the case with anybody else. That's not special treatment. That would be the case with anybody else against whom an inquiry is taking place. I'm sure she would accept that.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Paymaster General can simply clarify for us. Has he asked the Prime Minister about this party?
I'm not going to disclose personal conversations or otherwise. It's not. What I will say is that it is I am answering the questions on behalf of the government today, and the reality is the investigation will take its course, and she will have answers then.
Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My good friend and constituent, Will, whose father was ill with cancer, only saw him through a window for his 50th birthday the day after the Downing Street party. 5 weeks later, his father sadly passed away, and only 15 were allowed to the funeral. What does the Minister and the Prime Minister have to say to Will and his family? Because quite frankly, they feel like there's one rule for them and another rule for everyone else.
Yeah. Minister.
I offer my condolences to her friend and constituent and her friend's father for their loss. When I speak from this dispatch box, I do so as an individual who understands the loss that others have suffered. We all know that. Everyone in this House knows that. We all are equal under the law in this country, and as a law officer, I recognise that first and foremost. She will no doubt also recognise that in the interests of fairness, when an inquiry or investigation is underway, it should be allowed to come to its natural conclusion.
That's Shah.
Speaker. It pains me about, the fact that Muslims had to couldn't celebrate Eid with family, but what pains me more, and really does pain me more, is on the 20th of May, one of my constituents was being buried at Nabwood Cemetery. Her daughter, Maxine Elliott, told the ITV Today, when Barbara Elliott was buried and she was being laid to rest, her and her family were behind barricades as the coffin went past. They were only allowed 10 members of the family and weren't allowed to kiss the coffin or put a flower on it. All while 40 members of the Prime Minister, including his Prime Minister and his wife, organised a party in Downing Street Gardens so long as though they bought their own booze. What does the Minister have to say to Maxine Elliott, and will the Minister ask the Prime Minister himself to personally apologise to her and her family?
Well, I cannot begin to imagine the personal tragedy and loss that she describes from her family and her friends and relatives. And there's no attempt on my part to try to do so. All I can say is that my heart goes out to them for their loss. We have had to suffer considerable imposition in this country as a consequence of the pandemic. But those impositions have been placed upon society for good reason, and that is to protect the wider public interest.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had a phone call from Jill McCulloch in my constituency. She was so angered by the overnight news and recent reports about these parties in Downing Street. Her father, who would have been 100 this year, passed away in the summer of 2020. She was not able to visit him in May 2020. Like so many people up and down the country, she was abiding by the rules. Is it not a simple case that this government lives by a rule for themselves and another for the rest of us?
Minister.
Certainly not. If that were the case, there would be no investigation. The very fact that there is an investigation in progress, the very fact that this matter is in the public domain and is being inquired into, is a clear indication that the same rules apply to everyone.
Ellie Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When my constituent gave birth to her first child in May 2020, her husband could only be there for the final stages of labour and had to leave 2 hours after the birth of his son. Mum and baby had to stay in hospital due to complications, and they weren't allowed any visitors at all. She was lonely and isolated, and her baby was struggling to feed. Her husband didn't see the baby again until he was 4 days old. My honourable friend, the member for Ogmore, has asked the Minister if he will apologise to the parents of lockdown babies who did the right thing at great personal cost whilst Number 10 partied. Will he now give that apology?
Minister.
I cannot prejudge the investigation, but of course it is a source of considerable personal regret that anyone suffers the imposition and inconvenience and distress that they have suffered, and many examples have been given in this House. Of course that's a matter of personal regret, but it's not appropriate to prejudge the investigation that's in progress. But if she's asking me to express my regret about the tragedy that has befallen all of those families that have suffered loss and frankly grotesque invasions of their family life, then I do so unreservedly.
Jim Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Northern Ireland, we reached a milestone of 3,000 deaths due to COVID just last week. 3,000 people who followed the rules and grieved today. So will the paymaster, including my mother-in-law who died alone, will the Paymaster General confirm that there will be a full and complete disclosure to enable the police service to ascertain that all was done decently and within the regulations at the date and at that time? I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
I'm very sorry for his loss, Mr. Speaker. He's asking me if the results of the investigation will be made public, and they will be.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I notice that the Minister conveniently avoided answering the Deputy Leader's question about the Chancellor. So I'd like to ask the question again. The Chancellor was the next-door neighbour. Did he know about the event in Downing Street on the 20th of May 2020, and did he attend the event himself?
Minister.
I do not know, and I presume that can be a question that Sue Gray can inquire into.
Bernard Pondesar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Page 1, Section C of the Ministerial Code says, "It is of paramount importance that ministers give accurate and truthful information in Parliament, correcting any inadvertent error at the earliest opportunity. Ministers who knowingly misled Parliament will be expected to offer resignation to the Prime Minister." My question to the Minister is, if the Prime Minister knowingly misled Parliament about the existence of this or any other party, will he resign as the Ministerial Code says he should?
Minister. There's absolutely no indication of anything along those lines. So she is mischaracterising the position, and she's jumping the gun. So I think it's best not to make political points, but rather to wait for Sue Gray's investigation.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've heard today some reminders of what so many people in this country were going through in May 2020. One of the things which helped keep us all together was the belief that we were all in it together, and the government understood and supported what we were going through. Can the Paymaster General tell us whether the Prime Minister appreciates that now my constituents, and I'm sure constituents elsewhere in the country, feel let down, betrayed and treated with contempt by this Prime Minister and his government? And can he tell us when he will show some respect for the House and come here and answer the questions we all have for him?
Minister.
The Prime Minister will come to this House tomorrow at Prime Minister's questions, and the Leader of the Opposition or his deputy will have the opportunity to ask questions then. She asks whether we are all in together. Yes, we are all in this together. And the Prime Minister knows. As Prime Minister, he sees the documents, he sees the scientists, he sees the medical professionals, he meets the families, he visits around the country. He's in a better position than most to know the impact of this pandemic. And he fully recognises, not only because of his personal experience, but because of what he has seen and witnessed by his visits and by his meetings and by everything else that he's done as Prime Minister since this COVID pandemic began. He does recognise that. He's on the side of the people of this country, and he's working to achieve the best results for the people of this country.
Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many thousands of families during this pandemic have suffered when loved ones have been in hospital having surgeries, operations without the benefit of their families. Nothing to do with COVID, but an impact of the restrictions. My family have been through that. My brother was in hospital in May 2020 and I couldn't visit him. He sadly died in April 2021. And again, we could only visit him in the last hours of his life. What my family have suffered is no different than many thousands across this country. We stuck to the rules. We did what was expected. And to find out through the press that the Prime Minister, the Downing Street were partying at those times made me feel sick to the stomach. And I felt utter contempt for their behaviour. When will the Prime Minister come to this House, confess what has happened and take responsibility for the actions under his watch in Downing Street? And sometimes saying sorry is good, but is not enough.
Minister.
The Prime Minister will be here tomorrow, Mr Speaker, as I've said, in the normal course of events, and he will continue to represent the government of this country and recognises better than anyone the impact of this appalling pandemic on the people of this country.
Ronnie Cowans.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. We work within a system where the Prime Minister appoints the independent adviser, and the Prime Minister is responsible for applying the ministerial code. But this Prime Minister has demeaned his position by becoming a law unto himself. He refuses to observe the Nolan principles. So who amongst this government is going to be brave enough to tell this Prime Minister that the party is finally over?
Minister.
Well, he makes those accusations. They're not supported by the evidence, and he should wait to see what the result of the investigation is. The Prime Minister acknowledges the importance of the Nolan principles in public life, and he adheres to them.
Sometimes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In December, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules, because I was also furious." I can only think, Mr Speaker, that his own cabinet and ministers must be furious, given so few of them showing up here today, supported in the same way perhaps a rope supports a hanging man. I'll tell you who else was furious. My constituents, churchgoers, unable to go to church at Easter, Muslims unable to go to the mosque and to celebrate Eid with their own families. My local Muslim burial ground, often at times unable to dig the graves fast enough to put the bodies into it in Redbridge. When will the Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, use his next address to the nation to apologise to each and every one of those families for his disgraceful rule-breaking that has left not only this government devoid of any support amongst the British public, but is harming our democracy itself?
Minister.
Well, I've already said, and I'll repeat, that those who were unable to celebrate the high holy days of their religion suffered a terrible imposition, whether that was Easter for the Christian community or Eid or Passover, and one can only express sorrow that that has had to happen. But it's had to happen in countries around the world because of the exigencies of the pandemic. The Prime Minister is carrying on the business of government, as my fellow ministers are, and will continue to do so.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank you for granting this important, urgent question. And the Minister won't think me fair, and he'll go on about process. But I have to say, having listened to what everybody has said about what their constituents have been through, I think coming here with not a single answer to a single question is the height of disrespect. So can I ask, Mr Speaker, a question, a simple one that will be easy for the Minister to answer, that he must know: when will this investigation be over?
Minister.
Well, I think the Honourable Lady is fair. I'm sure she is fair. And she knows, I think she does clearly know, that no disrespect is intended. But what she doesn't recognise is that what is also fair is the proper administration of justice. And one of those fundamental tenets, a pillar of fairness, is to allow investigations to continue. She wishes to prejudge. She wishes to cast stones before she knows what has exactly happened. The fair thing to do would be to await the result of any investigation that has been commissioned.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If ever there was a time to be candid with this House, it's now. And I'm asking the Paymaster General a question of him, not of anybody else. He didn't answer my honourable friend from Garston Hill, but I'll give him another go. Has the Paymaster General been told whether the Prime Minister attended the Downing Street party on the 20th of May or not? If so, what was the answer?
Minister.
I'm not going to discuss what, in this House, what private conversations take place between government ministers. I know my duty to this House, and the reality of the matter is he wishes to prejudge the matter. He's wrong to do so. It is not a matter for me. I am not conducting the inquiry. It is a matter for Sue Gray. Sue Gray and her team will be investigating the matter and will come to the due conclusion. He should wait patiently for that. I don't know when that, I think his predecessor question was about when that answer will come. I don't know the answer to that, but we have asked that it be done swiftly, and as soon as that is possible, it will be given.
Manichari.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to hear the Paymaster General tell us earlier that the Prime Minister has recently visited a police station. I hope he'll be visiting another one soon, this time with the benefit of his solicitor. But I want to return to the issue of fixed penalty notices that was raised by another honourable member. Because last April, the Joint Committee on Human Rights, we issued a report saying that the fixed penalty notices issued during the height of the crisis, which could be as much as £10,000, were muddled, discriminatory and unfair. Now, this incident, which is currently being investigated, and I use the word advisedly, really only goes to show that we were right in our concerns about unfair enforcement of the rules during the pandemic. And I think the Paymaster General acknowledged earlier, as you would expect from a former law officer, that one of the most important principles to a democracy is the principle of equality before the law. So, will the government now commit to a review of all the fixed penalty notices that were issued during the height of the crisis, as recommended in our report, and will the government consider pardons for those who have been held to a higher standard than those who govern us?
Minister.
Surely she would know, Mr. Speaker, about the pillars of fair justice, and she knows that it's necessary to wait for the result of the investigation. She would know that better than most. As for the enforcement of rules, they apply equally to everyone in this country, and they have done for many generations, and they will continue to do so.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In May 2020, a constituent told me this. I had a little baby boy on the 17th of April, but because of pandemic conditions, we have been unable to have anyone round. Not friends, nor family. We're completely on our own. It's been really hard. My dad hasn't met his grandson, and I'm feeling exceptionally isolated and alone without any support. How does the Minister feel? How does he himself feel about the behaviour of the Prime Minister and Downing Street staff enjoying a drinks party while new mothers like my constituent felt unsupported and desperately alone?
Minister.
I can tell the Honourable Lady how I feel about what has happened to her constituents. And as a human being, I feel considerable regret and sorrow and indeed distress for those who have suffered loss. Of course I do. We all do. We would not be human if we didn't. So I say to her, I'm terribly sorry for the loss of her constituents, friends and families, and for everybody who has suffered loss. But my feelings are irrelevant. What matters is the opinion of those who have been charged with the heavy duty of investigating the propriety of gatherings that may or may not have taken place. When that person then reports back on the result of their investigations, then no doubt the Honourable Lady will wish to discuss the matter further.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Paymaster General has made various references to fairness and justice, natural justice today. He's made no reference at all to the Nolan Principles, the 7 standards that govern us all in public life, including honesty, leadership and accountability. So, on that basis, why will the Prime Minister not do what Gavin Barwell, a former Chief of Staff in Number 10, has suggested, and come clean and say whether he attended that party or not? Why is he hiding behind Sue Gray's investigation?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no one is hiding behind anything. The fact is, the Prime Minister will be here at PMQs tomorrow, as I've already said. The investigation is one free of any favour or fear. It is taking place impartially and will produce an equitable result. And when we know what that result is, we'll be able to comment further. But we mustn't prejudge the matter. I think I did actually refer to the Nolan Principles in an answer to a question from the Scottish nationalists. But what I know is that the Prime Minister respects those 7 principles of public life and that he adheres to them. He's served in the public realm for many years as Mayor of London, as a Member of Parliament, as Prime Minister, before that as Foreign Secretary. I know the Prime Minister, and I know that he is a man of integrity, and he wishes to conduct himself appropriately. What will happen will be that in the normal course of events, the senior civil servant, and the civil service is an entity that we all respect in this country, the senior civil servant who has been charged with an independent assessment of this matter will report in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Alison Lowther, who is a nurse in the ICU at the Whittington Hospital, tragically left her role wanting to go to the funeral of her grandmother but couldn't get there for COVID reasons. Will he give a message to Alison, who works day in, day out to look after COVID patients? The Whittington Hospital having had one of the highest numbers of COVID cases last week. What does he say to her and to her family that she had to watch her grandmother's funeral on Zoom while she slaved and they over there partied with their bring your own booze party? It's an absolute disgrace.
Minister.
I can only offer my condolences to her constituent for their terrible loss, and I offer those condolences through her to her constituent.
Geraint Davies.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, at the time of the Number 10 Downing Street party, people in Swansea in Wales could face fines between £60 and £1,920 for holding similar events. Doesn't this show the respect the Welsh Labour government holds for the public health of its citizens, in contrast to the contempt that the Prime Minister holds? And given that he must know whether he actually was at the party, why won't he simply say that? Why should we wait for inquiry to find out what he already knows? Why is he hiding the truth?
Minister.
It would be inappropriate to make a running commentary on an investigation that is in progress, and we will continue to await the result of the investigations undertaken by Sue Gray.
Lord Hayes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Ruby Fuller was a remarkable young woman who'd been head girl at the charter school in Dulwich and lived by her motto, live kindly, live loudly, in pursuit of her passion for social justice. She had many, many friends. Ruby died, aged 18, from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma on the 15th of May, the same day that the Prime Minister sat enjoying cheese and wine in the Downing Street garden, and 5 days before 100 staff were invited to a Bring Your Own Booze party. Ruby's friends had to say goodbye on Zoom, and her family were allowed just 10 people at her funeral. What does the Prime Minister, via his minister, have to say to Ruby's family and her friends, young people in my constituency who should have confidence in their government, who are looking at the evidence in front of them in plain sight and seeing that it is one rule for them and another for everyone else?
No. Mr. Speaker, what the Prime Minister would say, and what I say, is that the motto that Ruby, she says, lived by, live kindly and live loudly, to lose such a young life at such a tragic age and in such appalling circumstances is a sorrow that those who loved her will never be able to get over. There's nothing that I can say that will ameliorate that. But what I can say is that both the Prime Minister and I and the entire government would offer our condolences for their loss and would say that in the short life that she lived, if she made people around her happy, she is someone who will be remembered throughout her friends' and family's whole lives.
Sean Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree that every moment that goes by with the government of the United Kingdom unable to say where the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom was on May the 20th makes the government more and more of a laughingstock and undermines the critical public health messages on which so many lives depend? And will he apologise to the heroes of the NHS, such as those at Newcastle Hospitals Trust, who spent hours and hours in full PPE, working exhausting and often traumatic shifts, and yet managed to keep lockdown rules?
Well, the Prime Minister has personally thanked all of those who have worked to protect people during this pandemic and will continue to do so. And the Prime Minister has visited hospitals, he's spoken to medical professionals, doctors, nurses, scientists, and those directly involved, and has repeatedly thanked them and feels that thankfulness from the bottom of his heart. And he himself, of course, was served as at St Thomas's Hospital by medical professionals who helped save his life when he was admitted to intensive care. He knows that firsthand.
Martin Doherty.
As of yesterday, across Clydebank, Dumbarton and the Vale of Leven, 300 men and women, my constituents, have died of COVID-19. Most incubated, the vast majority alone, and many without access to the burial traditions of our ancestors. So can I ask the Paymaster General that if a Tory party in Downing Street took place during a global public health emergency, do they agree with me that it is that if the Prime Minister participated and or sanctioned in any shape or form, or senior members of the British Civil Service in Whitehall did the same, were even invited and did nothing to advise against it, that it is a fatal blow not only to the Prime Minister's premiership, but to the independence and impartiality of the Civil Service in Whitehall?
Minister.
It's not appropriate to prejudge. He wishes to prejudge what occurred. We will await the outcome of the investigation.
Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I received an email from a constituent, Anja, whose mother died in a nursing home in St Helens, unable to hold her hand or be close to her before her death. And she is outraged, like lots of other people, by the actions of the Prime Minister and those people who partied in Downing Street Garden. So will the Paymaster General agree with me that the Prime Minister needs to take decent action and resign?
Minister.
No, I don't agree with that, because that would be inappropriate. What the Prime Minister has done is devote his time as Prime Minister to serving the people of this country in dealing with the crisis that has been this pandemic, probably the biggest crisis that has befallen this country of any type since the end of the Second World War. And this Prime Minister has led the way. He's delivered on vaccines, he has delivered on healthcare, he has delivered across the board and achieved the results in a very difficult circumstances that we see in the progress of this pandemic. What we are doing now is awaiting the results of an independent investigation into allegations of gatherings. When we have that information, we'll be able to comment further.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 days after the party, on the 20th of May, revelations came out about Dominic Cummings, of course, and 5 days after the party, we had the Downing Street press conference with Dominic Cummings explaining his activities in Barnard Castle. I had 923 people write to me in anger about that. Many of them, not just with the incident itself, but with the attempted cover-up. Now, it seems to me that the government are making exactly the same mistake again. What the British people want is honesty. So could I ask the Paymaster General a very simple question, completely separate from the inquiry? Could he publish a list of the Prime Minister's engagements on the 20th of May?
It's not a matter for me, Mr. Speaker. What the Prime Minister's engagements are a matter, I believe, of public record. Those that are routinely released are a matter of public record. Those that are not routinely released. And that is the general practice that occurs and has occurred with Prime Ministers from across this House, the different parties of this House. But I know that she will want to wait for the result of the investigation for a proper answer.
I'll listen to this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my constituent Frances called my office this morning angry and upset that while she was unable to visit her brother with learning disabilities during lockdown, the Prime Minister and his staff were partying it up in the Downing Street garden. Her brother was unable to understand why his family couldn't visit, and he believed that they had died and was in great distress as a result. What has the Paymaster General got to say to Frances and her brother?
Minister.
What I say to Frances and her brother and to all of our constituents across this House who have suffered loss is that my heart goes out to them and my sympathies go out to them, and I deeply regret the personal loss and tragedy and bereavement and distress that has befallen tens of thousands of people in this country. That is what I offer, whether I hope it is accepted. But all I can do is to say that we are all working extremely hard to mitigate the impact of this pandemic, and that we will continue to do that.
Mary McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too obviously have constituent accounts from around that time. One says, my aunt committed suicide a few weeks ago and I could not hug my mum who found her body at her funeral. Another one wasn't able to visit a brother with stage 4 throat cancer or visit her 87-year-old housebound mother. With all due respect to the Paymaster General, my constituents don't know who he is. They aren't interested in hearing about his regret, his distress, his sorrow. They want to hear from the Prime Minister. And unless the Speaker has it in his power to extend Prime Minister's questions to 7 o'clock tomorrow, there's not going to be time for all of us. And I think the Prime Minister should come to this House and every single one of us should have the opportunity to stand up and read out all their long lists of cases, and the Prime Minister ought to show some empathy himself.
Minister.
Well, the Prime Minister will be here tomorrow. The proceedings of this House are well established. The Speaker controls the proceedings of this House. The Prime Minister is here on a weekly basis answering questions and will do so in the normal way tomorrow.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Given the immense sacrifices of the British people, surely the Paymaster General must understand not just their fury, but their deep, deep hurt. My constituent Jane Nicholson emailed me this morning to say, my mother died without us at her side in Hampton Care Home on Saturday, 28th March. The home was locked down on the Monday before. I had to conduct a mobile phone call from the car park through the window to her on that Monday. She did not live to receive our scheduled Skype call on the Saturday. We followed all guidelines to protect everyone involved and are traumatised as a result, but we acted responsibly and have continued to do so. Downing Street, she says, should have done the same. No one is above the law. What does the Paymaster General have to say to Jane?
Minister.
I say to Jane that I again apologise unreservedly for the upset that these allegations have caused. And I say to Jane that I'm very sorry for her loss. We are conducting an investigation independent of government, and we'll await the results of that investigation to establish what exactly has occurred as regards the gatherings that this House has been discussing.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are some who think that the Paymaster General's performance in stonewalling at that dispatch box for almost an hour and a quarter now is something to be congratulated or to be revered in politics. I don't. This is not a courtroom. The Paymaster General is not representing a client to whom he owes an absolute duty to represent their best interests. That dispatch box is where ministers come to tell the truth with complete candour, holding nothing back. Does the Paymaster General not realise that regardless of the Prime Minister's non-existent reputation, his own reputation has been shredded in the last 45 hours and 50 minutes? Does he not realise that as a result of that, not only is the Prime Minister finished, but his own position now has become almost untenable?
Well,
Minister.
I can only say that I'll leave others to make those judgments.
Jonathan Edwards.
Mr Speaker. This morning I received an email from a constituent whose mother died from COVID at the end of April 2020. The funeral was conducted via webcam in order to follow the rules, and the family says this means that they weren't able to say a proper goodbye. My constituent says that these revelations have destroyed her. If the investigation reports that a party was held and that the Prime Minister or other ministers attended, what does he think would be an appropriate political sanction?
Well, that is a hypothetical, and it's not appropriate for me to make that judgment. It wouldn't be appropriate no matter what the result of the investigation was. As a minister in the Cabinet Office, my responsibility is to answer for government business in the way that we've been hearing. What I am inclined to do is what I would do for anyone else, because we're all equal under the law, and that is to await the fair results of a fair, independent inquiry.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think, like most people, if somebody was hosting a gathering in my back garden, I'd probably notice at some stage. And I'm also fairly sure I would remember whether or not I was there. Would the Paymaster General agree with me that the failure of the Prime Minister to confirm whether he knew about this gathering, and indeed whether or not he was there, is the reason why his authority is draining away even faster than the number of backbenchers prepared to come up this afternoon to support him during this session?
Minister.
No, I don't agree with his characterisation. And the government buildings around Downing Street are not domestic buildings in the way that he characterises them. So, as a general point, he's wrong to make that assumption or characterisation. But what I do say is that I accept that these allegations have caused considerable upset. I apologise unreservedly for the upset that those have caused, but we'll await the results of the investigation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When someone's alleged conduct undermines the integrity of their role, when it undermines the authority of their role, when it undermines the trust in their role, they are suspended. When somebody is under investigation, they are suspended. So why isn't the Prime Minister suspended?
Minister.
Well, the investigation is about gatherings, not about necessarily individuals. The investigation that has been in progress since, I think, the 9th of December, or around that date, is about gatherings, and gatherings on various dates. I've already said that if those inquiries lead to other developments, then remedial action will follow, and that includes civil servants. But we have expected, and we continue to expect, anyone who is asked to cooperate with that investigation to do so.
Final question, Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, we've all seen the footage on Sky News of the Prime Minister smirking, even chuckling at the suggestion that he attended his party in his own back garden. So can I ask the Minister a straightforward question? Is it not the case that the Prime Minister hasn't just been laughing at the public, he's also been lying to them?
Sorry, it's not the language we use, and I think you could just temper the language. Inadvertently might do. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's nonsense to make that assumption or accusation against the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister does not and has never taken these matters lightly. He takes them incredibly seriously. He has devoted a preponderance of his time as Prime Minister, and rightly so, to this pandemic. He knows its consequences. He personally has been affected by it. He sees the victims all the time, and when he visits around the country. So his characterisation is unworthy and unfair.
We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Christine Rees.
Hi, John, you're right.
Sorry.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about groups of employees at risk of redundancy, buying their employing company as a cooperative and for connected purposes. As a Labour and Cooperative MP, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very proud that Robert Owen, who was born on the 14th of May 1771 and regarded as founder of our cooperative movement, whose vision included villages of cooperation, a new world order of mutual help and social equality, was born in Newtown, Powys, in beautiful Wales. In the 1840s, cotton and woolen workers in Rochdale fought against falling wages and poor working conditions and adopted Robert Owen's values to form the first UK cooperative. By 1900, there were 1,439 different UK cooperative societies with over 2 million members. And in 1917, the Cooperative Party was formed with an electoral agreement with the Labour Party. UK cooperators believe that too much power rests with a small number of investors, shareholders and executives. And decisions are often made for the benefit of the powerful and the wealthy, not for the benefit of communities, workers and the environment. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is evidence of the benefits of employee ownership in the UK. The Ownership Effect Inquiry, chaired by Baroness Bowles, found that there was an economic dividend to employee ownership that benefits workers, businesses and the wider economy. The Nuttall Review of Employee Ownership found a lack of awareness and a misconception of employee ownership among businesses. And banks, traditional funders, education, academia and advisors lack employee ownership expertise. The Employee Ownership Association found that without incentivised support for entrepreneurs and their employees to pursue employee ownership, few would take the perceived risk of changing their company structure and practices. Firms who want to transition to employee ownership, or those that have transitioned but want to expand, have problems accessing loans from banks. In times of crisis, cooperatives resist destabilisation because they fight for the long-term economic and social sustainability of their workers and sacrifice remuneration to reinvest and to maintain employment levels, and any restructuring takes place locally. UK Cooperative Party public polling in our Own in the Future report of June 2020 found that only 10% believed that the economy prioritised wealth sharing before the pandemic. But nearly 70% believe there will be an opportunity post-pandemic to widen ownership and give communities more say in how businesses and the economy operates and shapes our lives. Unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, nearly 2 years after the onset of the pandemic, the virus is mutating and not fading away. One way to widen ownership is to provide employees with the advice, support and funds to buy out their at-risk employer company. In Italy, the former Italian Industry Minister Giovanni Macora established the worker buyout system over 30 years ago during the economic crisis of the 1980s. Macora law gives workers the preemptive right to save their jobs by taking their redundancy entitlements plus 3 years projected social security payments as a lump sum to invest in a new worker-owned cooperative company supported by Italian government loans and advice. Since 1986, the Cooperazione Finanza Impresa, known as the CFI, beautifully pronounced. Thank you. An institutional investor has operated Macora law on behalf of the Ministry of Economic Development of the Italian government. And this is how it works, Madam Deputy Speaker. The CFI supports the setting up and development of worker production and social cooperatives, prioritising workers who have been excluded from the production cycle. When the employer is at risk, or the employer decides to close the business without succession planning, or a company has been sequestered or confiscated due to organised crime. Why? To promote, increase and safeguard employment so that new cooperatives can grow and compete. The CFI holds a temporary and minority shareholding for not more than 10 years, with a repayment of 25% due in the 5th year. Its recipients are SMEs with an annual turnover of less than €50 million and with a maximum of 250 employees. The funding lasts for not less than 3 years and not more than 10 years, with a 3-year grace period at 0% interest. The risk capital shareholding has a maximum value equal to the company capital or double in the case of reserves and member loans. The debt capital is made from participative, subordinate and subsidised loans. An amortisation plan is put in place for workers to gradually pay off the funding by deferred 6-monthly instalments expiring on the 31st of May and the 30th of November every year. Funding is granted for not more than €2 million and for not more than 5 times the share quota, which is held by the CFI in the beneficiary cooperative. The decision to grant CFI funding is conditional on the positive outcome of checks on workers using the National State Aid Register, which is a centralised mechanism for verifying tax payments, social security contributions and public aid, and that workers have complied with the Anti-Mafia Code. The average investment per worker is €12,040, which is considered non-taxable for these purposes. The Ministry of Economic Development retains 98.6% of the capital investment and has an overseeing role on the CFI board. And the CFI has a success rate of 85%, achieved by investing over €300 million in 560 companies, saving jobs of 25,000 workers with a return of over 6 times the investment, and retaining the skills and experience of the Italian workforce. I must confess, Madam Deputy Speaker, that as a Labour and Cooperative MP, I have previous as far as Macora law is concerned. I secured a Westminster Hall debate last September about cooperative purchases of companies, and last December I spoke about Macora law in an excellent Westminster Hall debate on cooperatives and mutuals, secured by the Honourable Member for Wickham. In both debates, I set out the benefits of employee ownership, as I have today, Madam Deputy Speaker, and urged the UK Government to consider introducing a UK-type Macora law. And Italy is watching us, Madam Deputy Speaker. Camillo De Berardinis, CEO of the CFI, watched my Westminster Hall debate and invited me to speak at the 35th anniversary of the CFI held in Rome last November to celebrate the commitment of Italian workers who had transformed the failing companies they worked for into successful cooperatives. Unfortunately, I didn't get to Rome. They beamed me in from Nice. In response to the pandemic, the Chancellor created the furlough scheme, which saved many, many jobs. Perhaps he would consider creating a UK Macora law to save many more jobs during the ongoing pandemic and into the future. And in honour of the Chancellor, Madam Deputy Speaker, we could call it Sunak's Law. And I humbly request that the bill be given due consideration and passed into law. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As matters that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Gareth Thomas, Tracy Crouch, Luke Pollard, Christine Jardine, John McNally, Claire Hanna, Steve Baker, Preet Cowgill, Ben Lake, Rachel Maskell, Jim Shannon, and myself.
Christina Rees.
Cooperatives Employment Company Ownership Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, 18th of March 2020.
Friday, the 18th of March. Thank you. Thank you. Why do I hear something in the chamber? I'm sure it will be switched off soon. We now come to the first Opposition Day motion in the name of the Leader of the Opposition on value-added tax on household energy bills. I call Rachel Reeves to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Prices are rising, bills are soaring, inflation is at its highest level for 3 decades. The growing cost of living crisis is leaving families across our country worse off. People deserve security, prosperity and respect. But what does the Chancellor give them? The highest tax burden in 70 years and no action on rising costs. The Chancellor's national insurance rise is a tax on jobs. It's unfair and it is yet another broken promise. The Conservatives are becoming the high-tax, high-inflation party because they have become a low-growth party. Today, they can take a straightforward step to show that they want to start breaking us out of that cycle. Voting for Labour's motion will allow us to bring forward legislation to cut VAT on household energy bills from 5% to 0 for 1 year and reserve parliamentary time on the 1st of February to do just that. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
The honourable member for giving way. The Labour Party has spent the last 6 years campaigning against the very ability to do what they want today, which is Brexit, right? Which is the only reason they are able to do what they want to do today. So won't you be honest with the House and say, in the heart of hearts, what if she really wanted to go back into the European Union? This one measure they're proposing wouldn't be possible, would it?
I'll say to the honourable gentleman, we want to make Brexit work. We've got this power. Let's bring it in now. A VAT cut is something practical that this government can do right now, and it will be felt automatically in people's bills, in all of our constituents' bills. It will give security to people across our country, and I urge all MPs to back Labour's motion today. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
Thank the right honourable lady for giving way. Does she accept, however, that cutting VAT on household energy bills would give a disproportionate tax break to those with the biggest houses and the deepest pockets?
In fact, poorest households pay a higher proportion of their incomes on gas and electricity bills, and pensioners pay the highest proportion of their incomes on gas and electricity bills. So the beneficiaries of this will be those people, the people who we know need that support more than anyone. We have had a decade of dither and delay from the Conservatives on energy policy. Now, there is indeed a global price spike for gas, but this government has left Britain uniquely exposed. They have failed to properly insulate homes or to invest in the new nuclear or renewables that we need. They have failed on gas storage, leaving us reliant on Russia and Qatar for our gas supply. They have failed to regulate the market, with 27 companies now gone bankrupt, and that has left rising prices hitting millions. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to the Shadow Chancellor for giving way. Does she share my incredulity at the suggestion from the honourable lady in the party opposite that somehow giving assistance to people in big houses is the wrong thing to do, when her party are giving them £300,000 to do up their driveway using levelling up money?
And that is levelling up in action, filling in the potholes at the Lord's Manor. On this side of the House, we want to keep bills low. That's why Labour is bringing forward this vote today, to reduce VAT on home energy bills to 0% for a year. It's why we would spread out the price increase about to hit bill payers because of the collapsing energy firms. And it's why we'd help the squeeze middle, those on lower incomes and pensioners, by increasing and expanding the Warm Homes discount to 9 million people. Our plan would save households £200 off their bills, with up to £600 in total for those who need it most. And we would pay for this with a windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas profits. These companies have profited massively because of exploding prices, so much so that some in the industry have referred to soaring energy prices as a cash machine for producers and their shareholders. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank the Honourable for giving way, and I welcome the Honourable Lady's proposals, but also could I suggest this? Whilst I welcome and support the green energy push as the only way forward, does the Honourable Lady agree that government should perhaps, in these extreme circumstances, consider removing the green tax within the current fuel crisis to bring down prices and thereby prevent the £750 household bill that each house will receive this year?
I welcome the concern of the honourable gentleman to reduce his constituents and all of our constituents' gas and electricity bills, and we're willing to look at anything that can be done to keep bills low this year. The proposals that we are putting